Have you ever had a fantasy that scares you? Maybe it feels too intense, or you're afraid it says something bad about you. I get it. It can be hard to figure out where to even start without crossing the line, but those darker desires don't have to be off limits. I'm Alessandra from Dom Subliving, and today we're diving into how you can safely explore those fantasies without fear, guilt, or judgment. Let's talk about how to do it right, safely and on your terms. Welcome to the Dom Subliving podcast. Now, if you want a list of ideas of different kinds of kinks and fantasies to explore, definitely grab my free checklist of kinks at domsubliving.com/checklist. It includes a list of over 50 kinks, including a lot of the darker taboo ones. But again, you can grab it at domsubliving.com/checklist. Now, if you clicked on this episode, it could be that you're curious about some of these darker desires or you have them yourself. And I just want to assure you that it's totally common to have these more frightening fantasies. And yes, these desires might stem from deeper emotions, kind of societal taboos, but it could just be because you're plain curious about different power dynamics and control, and that's totally okay too. But I just want to assure you that this is a shame-free zone because I experienced kind of this hesitation too when me and my partner were first starting to explore a fantasy I had with consensual non-consent or CNC. And so it just brought a lot of thoughts into my head about, why would I even like this? Especially women. Women aren't supposed to like this. If this happened in real life, I would feel so violated and wrong. So why is it that I'm getting off on this? So I totally understand the hesitation and the self-shame you may be having, but I want to go into this with an open mind for you. Because when you have one of these darker desires, you may be wondering, is this normal? Am I a freak? And so I get it. I've been there, but I'm going to be sharing some ways that you can explore it safely and really enjoy it. So now that we know that these frightening fantasies are so common with people, now we need to understand the nature of our darker desires. So, believe it or not, there is some psychology behind why people are drawn to darker desires or even just BDSM in general, because a lot of times it kind of plays with this power dynamic. There's has to be trust involved, there's aspects of control. And it just kind of leads to these scary or intense scenes. And when you're scared or you're having to fight back, that can have adrenaline in your body and dopamine and all these other really heightened senses in your body. And it gives you a thrill. So there's nothing wrong with it. And we're going to be going into how to enjoy it safely. So, as far as some examples of these types of frightening fantasies, so there is CNC that I already talked about, which is consensual non-consent, different fear play, different degradation play, edge play, even being chased and things like that. Those are all fantasies that include something intense happening, and it's always consensual, but it's just something that kind of is on the edge of this would be totally scary if it was happening in real life. And again, what makes these desires so compelling is it's that rush, that thrill where you're just so vulnerable and you're just exploring something taboo and forbidden. So now that we understand the nature of these darker desires and how they're completely normal, well, how do we bring it up with a partner? Because what if we bring it up with them and they say no? Or worse, that they start to judge us. So what are the steps that we can take? So the first step is to start with open, judgment-free communication. And so this goes both ways. If you're bringing up this kink that you're into, you don't want to have judgment for your partner if they say no. That judgment-free experience needs to go both ways. But I just want to tell you how important it is to set yourself up for success. So, really start with having a safe space. Make sure your partner is not stressed about work or something else. You know your partner best. Even if it's a potential partner, it's someone you recently met that you're wanting to explore this with, pick a time and place that is going to be the least stressful for both of you. So that way you can just focus on each other and what the other person was is saying. And again, that communication has to go both ways. They may have their reasons for not wanting to do it, and you need to be able to listen to them if you want them to listen to you. So when you're bringing this darker desire or this kink, this new kink to your partner, you want to bring it in a way that normalizes it. You don't want to bring it from a place of shame. You don't want to sit them down and say, I have something horrible to tell you. I have this really disgusting kink and I'm sure you're not going to like it. And, no one understands why I could like this. And I have this so much shame. Like, you don't want to bring it up in a way that is more like a confession. Like, telling them, like, I'm sorry that, I should have told you this sooner, or I'm sorry, I'm springing this on you. But just framing it as that it's curiosity and just helping to normalize that and letting them know that, hey, I'm curious about this thing I heard about, read about, something from my childhood, even, and I just thought it would be kind of neat to explore it. Again, so you don't need to bring any extra shame into these conversations by making it more of a deep, dark confession. But the third step to when you're having these conversations is really to respect consent, even when you're talking about it. So you can ask for consent, even in small ways, when you're starting to talk about your fantasy. So you can say something like, hey, I wanted to bring up this thing I've been wanting to explore. Is it okay if I talk about it with you? So again, they see, oh, they're wanting my consent. And then they can feel like at any time, if it gets too much, they can end the conversation. So, again, just something small, but being respectful when you're talking about it. Or if the person asks questions, you can say, well, is it okay if I go into more detail about it? So, again, asking for that consent so that way they feel respected. And I'll give you a little personal story about this too. So, when I was starting to learn about age play and wanting to explore that, I was really nervous bringing that up with my partner, especially because he knew things about me from my past. And I thought, like, I'm going to appear like the most messed up, demented person if I bring this up to him. So I really just again framed it as this simple conversation, about exploring something I was curious about. Um, Making sure I checked in with how he felt about it because I didn't want to assume that he was completely on board, that maybe he had his own, feelings and shame around it too, and just really helping us to communicate and making sure that we were both wanting to do this and that we were both being able to say what we wanted to say about it. So we talked about how to communicate these darker desires or kinks that you may have. So now let's talk about setting boundaries for these darker fantasies. Because setting clear boundaries before exploring any darker desires is so important. But I really want you to know that boundaries are not limitations. I know a lot of time when people hear boundaries, they think, now we're going to go into what I can't do, but that's really not it. It's a way to make the situation more safe and so that you can build more trust. So again, we're adding things, it's not taking things away. So, some key things in establishing boundaries are going to be number one, safe words. So, you want to have a safe word in place whenever you're exploring different kinks, but especially when you're exploring more of these intense scenes, because it's not so much just about the physical aspects, it's about the emotional and psychological too. So, letting your partner know that either one of you, if you're the Dom or the sub, or even if you're a switch, that it's okay to safe word if something gets just even emotionally too intense too. And then the second thing you need to do is discuss your hard and soft limits. So really talk about what it is that you're comfortable with. If you're having a hard time even articulating it, you can download our free checklist of kinks at domsubliving.com/checklist. And that way you can kind of just go through it together. And that way you make sure you cover everything. And then the third thing you need to do is to have check-ins. So really throughout the scene and after, you really need to check in with each other and just kind of monitor how you're both doing, emotionally and physically too. So what does this look like in practice when you're discussing boundaries? So for the example of the CNC, the consensual non-consent fantasy. So one of the boundaries you can talk about is like, for me, I don't like anything with my face. So, if we're fighting or we're getting, violent, physical, that's totally fine. But my face is off limits. So that's kind of like one of our boundaries. And then just making sure that beforehand we're both comfortable, that we have aftercare in place for both physical and emotional, and we'll be getting more into that too. But it's so crucial to have these boundaries because think about it, what's more important? Pushing the limits of your kink and your fantasy so that you get what you want, or making your partner feel safe and respected. So hopefully you can be doing more things in the future. So definitely prioritize discussing boundaries. So we've set the boundaries for these darker fantasies. So now let's talk about the role of aftercare during darker scenes. So we know that aftercare is really important when you're having a intense scene, but it's especially important when you're exploring more of these taboo or darker desires because you really need that emotional and physical aftercare to really help ground both you and your partner so that way you can process like what just happened. So there's different types of aftercare and everyone is unique in what they want and need, but just some examples are things like cuddling, having, comforting words, giving them space, and some forms might be more necessary after an intense scene. Because I know I've shared this experience before, but there was a time when me and my dom explored some really hardcore stuff and it got really, really intense. And afterwards, I was really, really upset. And he tried to give me, aftercare with, being very soothing and touching me. And I was just not having it. And I was freaking out, pushing him away, yelling at him, and he really didn't understand what was going on. But now we know, looking back, that what I needed in that moment was really just space to be able to calm down and process things, because my body and my mind were still thinking that was real, and I needed to kind of come back to reality. But so every partner is different. So in these instances, I really need space. But what my dom really needs is, after some time has passed, he really needs reassurance to know, like, okay, you're not a horrible person, that we were just kind of doing some edge play and exploring some of these darker fantasies, but it was totally consensual. Because how do you handle unexpected emotional reactions when they happen like that, even during the scene itself? Maybe not after, but how do you handle it when it's happening during the scene? What do you do when things don't go as planned? And a lot of times things do not go as planned. So maybe you had a emotional reaction that surprised you, or you started to get into it and you just thought, no, I changed my mind. I'm not ready. So what do you do then? Because a lot of times a fantasy may feel exciting in theory, but once you get into it, it can really trigger some unexpected emotional responses. And again, this can happen during the scene or even after the scene. So you really need to, manage these situations and, be very caring and understanding. because maybe you or your partner starts experiencing intense shame or guilt or some other kind of response you weren't expecting, like crying or anger. And that was kind of like what happened with my Dom. And so, how do you handle these things with empathy? Well, like with all things, you need to communicate, maybe give your partner space, maybe take a break for both of you too. That's totally okay. But letting them know, I'm going to give us a couple minutes to cool down and then we'll talk about what happened. That way, the other partner doesn't feel abandoned. You can also journal about these things too. And then when both of you are more calmer, you can discuss some things. So we talked about how to handle unexpected emotional reaction. So now let's debunk some misconceptions about darker desires that maybe even you are still believing. Because there is a lot of stigma surrounding darker fantasies and in BDSM in particular. And so people often think that there's something wrong with them. And so you really need to understand that these are just desires and they're contained in a consenting relationship. It doesn't say anything about you as a person that you're having these thoughts or desires. So there's so many misconceptions, like how people who explore darker desires are damaged, that there's something wrong with them, that it's not healthy to want to enjoy pain or degradation, or to, inflict that on someone else. But BDSM is really just this safe place where we can explore things like that in a consensual way. And so having those fantasies are completely normal. And in fact, so many people have them, they just don't talk about them. And in fact, these darker desires can actually strengthen your relationship. And one of the ways it does this is by deepening that trust and that intimacy with your partner, because you're pushing boundaries, but you're doing it in a safe and respectful way. So it can bring you closer together. And one really good example of this is breath play, because I always think when we're engaging in it that he literally has my life in his hands, on my throat as he's doing this. So it really just creates this trust and respect. And it strengthens your relationship too, because you're really having to get vulnerable with someone when you're talking about these deeper desires that you have and maybe the emotional connections behind them too. So it's helping to get you to communicate and to build that trust and becoming more vulnerable with your partner in the process. But I just want to emphasize that darker fantasies are completely normal. They can be explored safely with boundaries and communication, and they can even strengthen your relationship. So it's totally okay to be curious about intense fantasies, and you can safely explore them without fear or guilt now. And if you want a list of ideas of different kinds of kinks and fantasies to explore, definitely grab my free checklist of kinks at domsubliving.com/checklist. It includes a list of over 50 kinks, including a lot of the darker taboo ones. But again, you can grab it at domsubliving.com/checklist. But I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Do you have a darker desire you've been afraid to explore? Leave a comment and let me know your experience, or let me know what part of this episode really resonated with you the most. And if you're looking for more tips on how to create a safe, fulfilling BDSM experience and improve your dom-sub relationship, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. But thank you for joining me, and until next time, keep embracing your power and pleasure through dom-sub living.